The Jeffrey Epstein case is one of the most famous scandals in the United States. The billionaire who managed money for powerful people and behind all that headed a sexual exploitation scheme died in prison in 2019. But his story is far from over. In recent months, new official documents have been released, bringing to light revelations about people who were involved in his scheme and his victims. So let's recall Epstein's case. He was a billionaire financier with a house in New York, a mansion in Florida, a private island in the Caribbean, and a circle of very powerful friends. Officially, he claimed to manage fortunes for rich people, but in practice, he was accused of heading a sexual exploitation network, mainly involving minors. Girls were recruited many times by other victims of his, and many came from vulnerable situations, thinking they were going to get a chance with him, a scholarship, a job opportunity, especially because he had the means for that. He had many connections, but when they were inside his house or were, for example, on his Caribbean island, they suffered sexual abuse from him and from other people. In 2008, already back then in Florida, he was being investigated, and this resulted in a case against him with 50 girls saying they were abused by him in this way I told you about. But he managed to get a deal, and it was later discovered that the guy who made the deal for him, who was from the prosecutor's office, also had skeletons in his closet. In other words, he frequented these little parties. So Epstein admitted to a lesser part of the charges and got a light sentence. What was the sentence? He had to sleep in jail once during the week. That was it. And it was considered prison time. And he had gotten, I think, 2 years in jail, and he stayed a few months, so he fulfilled almost nothing of what he was supposed to serve. But years later, new victims appeared, reports started matching up. Several girls talked about the same place there on the Caribbean island, the same private jet he always used, and talked about the same names of his employees and allies. So in 2019, after a long investigation, he was arrested again, now in New York for sex trafficking on a federal scale. In other words, he moved people across the entire country, and it could be international because he went abroad, went to the Caribbean. And shortly after he was detained and was going to be tried and could talk about it all, he was found dead inside his cell, and the official version is that he took his own life. But this story was never really accepted, especially in the United States. So much so that it became such a big issue that everyone wanted access to his trial, because it was known that a prosecutor had helped him at some point, that the police covered for him, that he was friends with very powerful people. So who was being protected in this secrecy within the process? After his death, pressure increased, victims wanted to see who else was behind the scheme, and lawmakers began talking about cover-ups and demanding total transparency. In other words, it became a political issue. In November 2025, Congress approved a specific law for this, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, a specific law because of this guy. It forces the Department of Justice to release practically everything. This practically is very important. That was collected over decades. We're talking millions of pages, flight records, emails, reports, memos, photos, videos, notes, interrogations. Everything should be made available, but the text allows the government to redact names of victims from photos, and hide things that are against national security. In other words, let's say there are 10 senators involved. Let's not even mention Donald Trump. Let's say senators. 10 senators are involved there. There are photos of guys and such. Then this photo leaks, right? And it would be chaos within the U.S. government. For them, it could be a national security problem because it would weaken the government. In other words, if you have enough power to be in this position that presents a threat to national security, you're protected. That's basically what was said. So much of what's being released has a black bar over the name, the statement, the person, everything blurred there to hide something that's there, something that's relevant. And the first batch of documents came out on December 19th, 2025, which was supposed to be the date for everything to come out at once. But the first batch came out, and that's when the Department of Justice published almost 4,000 files all at once. There was everything. FBI reports, because the FBI has been investigated for its conduct in this case. Look how crazy that is. There were case records, evidence lists, attachments from previous investigations, and especially many photos of people. Bill Clinton, for example, appeared a lot, and because of that, he had to appear around there, filing lawsuits, including against the government because of this situation. This is because there's a photo of him inside a pool lying there in a kind of relaxed pose as if he were at home, right? In other words, the guy is close to him. There are also photos of him at other events where he's next to Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who is Epstein's accomplice. Other photos show Michael Jackson, Mick Jagger, Kevin Spacey, several very well-known people. None being incriminated, none with a child, none of that, but all with Jeffrey. I think the question that remains is this. You arrive on an island. You were invited by him. You got to the island without any malice. You got there and you see like 4 boys aged 14 to 16 giving him massages. Giving massages to his friends and going to a little room alone. You're not gonna say, what the fuck is happening here? So if these guys didn't say anything, why not speak up? Were they afraid or what? So that's why you have to know everyone who's involved to ask. Michael Jackson can't answer anymore, but the others can. And then on December 23rd, 4 days later, came the second batch with 30,000 new files. And this time, in addition to even more photos, there were audios, videos, and surveillance footage from the federal prison in New York, which is where he appeared dead there in 2019. But a lot of the content came cut again. It would get to an important part and cut, you know? And in this new batch, the big Brazilian group was revealed. There was an interview conducted by the FBI on May 2nd, 2019, and the title is generic. It's like this: Interview D, because the rest is censored. In the description appears the phrase original interview notes. In other words, it's something that came directly from the interview. Below, a sequence of short phrases that were handwritten with several passages that were erased. In other words, they censored important parts. In one of them appears exactly this: friends of friends, large Brazilian group, okay? All right, so they already mentioned the large group, and the context of the note is an account about people who would have been taken as possible victims for sexual encounters, including minors, in Brazil. In the same notes, the description of a young woman called Darker Skin, that's the name they give her, and also another called Amazonian Appearance. The text says this first one was taken at the end, in a moment of desperation when whoever was organizing things was running out of girls. In other words, kind of speaking against the girl's appearance too, right? Another text cites a girl who had just come from Brazil, who was a model and whom Epstein would have really fallen in love with. The note comments that he even talked about making a sketch or painting of her to have at home. He liked her so much. And a note that was made on the side of the paper shows the phrase living with mother at 13, left home at 14. I know a very strong rumor, I don't know for sure, but I'll never say the name, but about someone very famous who actually fits the story, that this person would be a victim of Epstein. Everything matches. The time they were starting to become famous is the time he was doing this the most. Late 90s, early 2000s. This person was taken to the island. This is known by people who have already appeared on Epstein's lists, right? And now a large group appeared talking about it, and it has to do with an artist who has the descriptions mentioned here. And in the middle of all this, there were still emails that talked about Trump, right? That talked about the current president of the United States. Democratic representatives released messages in which Epstein himself comments on the relationship with Trump. The idea is that Trump would be someone who knew what was happening but didn't say anything. In fact, there's a reference to this. The big megaphone didn't say anything, which was kind of like him. In another message, Epstein himself says the following: Trump knew about the girls and more than that, spent hours with one of them. And this girl he would have spent time with is a woman who appears in the documents as a victim of the exploitation scheme. So it would be one of the victims he would have spent hours with. And the documents don't show criminal evidence against Trump. There's nothing that incriminates him, which is why everything is normal in his life. And because of that, the White House reacted immediately, right? Accused the Democrats of leaking only what affects the president and talked about selective leaking and said that if you're going to show the document, you have to show everything. They're kind of trying to defend that Trump wants to show everything and that someone in the government doesn't want to. Understand? But the government isn't releasing everything. And there was already a law approved that said, look, you're supposed to send everything by December 19th. And the date has already passed. And on top of all this, there was still a birthday book that was made by Ghislaine Maxwell for him back in 2003 when he turned 50, which is the book called My First 50 Years. In this book, there are a bunch of messages from famous people saying, "Dear friend, you're a genius. Dear this, that, and so on." And there are people there who are very important, like Bill Clinton, who already appeared here, and Donald Trump. Clinton's is more institutional. He talks about Epstein's intelligence, how he always seemed interested in changing the world, and how he had friends who supported him. It's kind of a political letter, right? Because he's a political guy. Now Trump's letter, which actually leaked a while ago, is one of the most controversial things that was leaked. It was written over a drawing of a naked woman and talks about how he and Epstein have more in common than they imagine, and ends with the phrase, wishing that Epstein would be more and more there. A wonderful secret. Very suspicious, this letter. I think everyone who had this level of power knew. It's very famous people, man. It's Prince Andrew, you know? It's Bill Clinton. Man, whoever was very, very politically powerful should have known about this thing. Most likely, right? And well, in January 2026, the Department of Justice had to officially respond to the court, which had asked for the files to be published. And then came an important confession. So far, just over 12,000 documents have been released. Quite a lot, right? But in total, there are more than 2 million documents. A conversation between one cop and another, everything. Video of such place and whatever. So much so that the Attorney General said that more than 400 lawyers from the Department of Justice are working only on this. Just reading what was done, listening, watching, and transcribing, and that another 100 FBI employees are still helping. In other words, 500 people are there in a task force. And now we're waiting to see when everything will be released, because theoretically the deadline has already passed. Well, that was today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and keep watching us. We're in this together. Thanks.